What do you do when you feel like a judge is totally against you? You are going through a divorce or a child custody battle with a narcissist, and you get the feeling that the judge isn't your biggest fan. That is what we are going to talk about today. So, welcome to Coffee with Tina. I am Tina Swithin. I am the author of Divorcing a Narcissist, founder of One Mom's Battle, and the CEO of the High Conflict Divorce Coach Certification Program. Also, the founder of November's Family Court Awareness Month. Fine print, I am not an attorney. I cannot give you legal advice because I'm not qualified. Always consult with your attorney. They are your voice and your advocate inside and outside of the courtroom. So let's dive into today's topic. What do you do when you feel like a judge is totally against you? So I think it's important for us to look at this question through a variety of different lenses. First, if we are talking about the range of judicial officers, of judges, there are lots of variations. We tend to hear about the ones that are completely corrupt or misogynistic, inclusion. They are out in full force. But I think the larger pool is what most of us are dealing with. So when we're looking for, at the general pool of judges, there's a range from those who are good humans, but they lack training, all the way to the other end of the scale, which is those who are completely calloused, suffering from compassion fatigue. They are so desensitized to the things they hear and see every day that they probably need to retire or figure out a way to press reset because they are failing the most vulnerable members of our society. And they start putting abuse on a skewed and distorted scale, comparing abuses and traumas, minimizing abuse because, it's in their mind, it's not as bad as the case I saw on Tuesday or whatever it is. I will tell you, I do have a unique perspective because I watch a lot of court proceedings. In the past, it was in person, but due to COVID, it's now on Zoom. And I will, full transparency, my feelings on judges have changed since I walked this path as a pro per litigant, sitting in court and watching cases that are not my own has given me a different perspective. I'm not triggered by the topic because it's not my case, my children. And I'm going to tell you, and a lot of people are going to want to throw rocks at me, I actually have compassion for judges, for the good ones anyway. I could not do their job. There is no way in the world, for any amount of money, I would take that job. So when I am there as an observer, by the time I leave court for the day, I don't want to be around another human being. There are some days where I cannot wait to get home and burn sage. I'm ready to eat sage some days by the time I leave the courthouse. When a judge is sitting there watching case after case and seeing people ping pong back and forth, seeing the worst side of humanity, not knowing who to believe, they believe that everyone lies, and that's a huge part of the problem. And maybe they even recognize who the problem is, but their hands are tied by the law. I just couldn't do it. For these judges, it does wear on you. And it's actually a fairly small percentage of cases that fall into the category of what you and I are dealing with. So for the most part, they're just looking at everyone and saying, why can't you put your differences aside and do what's in the best interest of the children? And then you've got another issue in this category, or many judges have what I refer to as a grace period. And they expect that if a case comes through the doors of the courthouse, it's going to be conflict ridden, but they expect these cases to wrap up within a year to a year and a half max. And that is typical. It's the majority of cases. So many times they're annoyed with everyone across the board. They're thinking, wrap it up and move on. That is the thought process. They are able, because they see this day in and day out, they are able to lift their vision and see beyond the muck. So, and many of these situations are so predictable. So the unfortunate part is that we are all lumped into that category. And because of that, the first year to the first year and a half, the judges have that grace period mentally, and they're, expecting that things are going to wrap up and everyone's going to move forward. But for those of us who are on this particular battlefield, it doesn't work that way. So the majority of the time for us, that first year and a half of our cases is largely trivialized. It becomes us walking into the courtroom dependent on them to help us, and the judge continuing to wipe the slate clean and sending us to go back out and try again. Meanwhile, we are struggling, our children are suffering, and it's a living nightmare. It's only towards the end of that grace period, whatever it is for that particular judge, somewhere around the 2-year mark is for many, when the judge starts leaning in a little bit closer and trying to figure out who the problem is, what the problem is, why are you still here? Now you are registering as problematic, or the term that so many hate, high conflict. It's only at that point that the judge starts to pay closer attention. And everything that's happened for the past year and a half, 2 years is considered in the past, even though it's very relevant. So now at this point, so much of it comes down to the judge, to their training, to their experience, their biases, and other variables, become your presentation, the history of your case, how skilled you have been at documentation. That is a huge part of all of this. I cannot emphasize enough. I 100% believe that a large part of why my children are safe today is because of my documentation system. And if you don't have a system that works for you and allows you to pull things together in a way where you can showcase what the issues are, and I highly recommend the documentation system that I've used. You can find it on the One Mom's Battle website. If you go to onemomsbattle.com and then online courses, there are packages there. You can just buy the documentation course, but it is so important. Another part that, so much of this comes down to the communication, how you're presenting in that communication, how the other party is presenting. So many people make the mistake of writing to their ex-husband or ex-partner. And in that, your feelings about them usually show through. There's a huge strategy involved in communicating with this type of person. And there's so many times where I will review someone's communication and they believe they're doing a stellar job, and I see lots of areas, room for improvement. They aren't choosing their battle wisely. You can tell in the communication they don't like the other person. They aren't waiting, a few hours until they aren't triggered, so they're sending emails, they're responding quickly, and it comes through. Then the other variables that come into play, the other party's skill level when it comes to impression management, how tight they're able to keep the mask on. And some are better than others. So when I'm looking at this question, what do you do when you feel your judge doesn't like you? I'm envisioning a judge who falls into this general pool of judges, not corrupt, not evil, but for whatever reason, you just feel that they don't like you or that they're against you. And this is the point I want to pause and say I am not trying to gaslight you by saying, you're too sensitive, you're reading too much into this. There may be absolute reality to what you're saying. Maybe the judge is really against you. I will tell you, I have felt like this at many junctures, and especially that first 2 years of my case. In fact, one of the first things our judge said to us back in 2009 is, if this is the way you two are starting off your case, you're crazy. And it made me feel defeated before we even started. Here I was preparing my court documents up until the middle of the night with my freaking laptop computer propped up in an old dirty windowsill because it was the only way I could tap into a neighbor's Wi-Fi from the women's shelter. And I'm being chastised for the level of conflict when I fled with my children to a shelter because I was literally in fear for my life. It immediately felt like a bad dream. Our judge was openly annoyed with both of us for the first 2 years. He did not even try to hide it. My ex-husband would constantly ask for continuances. And most of the time, I tried to push things forward unless I could tell that the judge was in a bad mood that day. And then I would agree to the continuance. Because I learned to read the judge, it gave me an advantage over my ex-husband, who was horrible with social cues and did not know when to shut up. So looking back, I was seeing things through a different lens than my judge was. I was desperate for him to help me to see what the issues were, and he just saw me as a case number. And most of the time, it was not personal. For him, it was very much a business transaction, just another part of his day. We were in annoyance, and it's not okay, but that is a horrifying reality, and one where I had to practice radical acceptance and to reframe how I was viewing this situation and many other situations in family court. And speaking in general terms regarding, whether we're talking about a judge who is annoyed with us or doesn't like us, or a custody evaluator, or anyone who's appointed to take a closer look at our case. Again, as long as we aren't talking about someone who's corrupt or in collusion, I think there are things we can do to shift the narrative in our favor. I found in my own journey that humanizing myself goes a long way. Most of these professionals are doing this work day in and day out. It is just a job. We are case numbers. We are business transactions. They forget that we are out of our element, that this is unfamiliar territory to us. And add to that, it's traumatizing territory for us. And we're in a system that is not trauma informed. So I preferred to remind them that I have a pulse, that I am human, and that this is foreign territory for me. So for example, if I was forced to take the stand, I would probably say something like, "Your Honor, I'm a little bit nervous. This is my first time ever sitting in this seat." Or if I were in front of a custody evaluator, sitting down and saying, total transparency, I'm a bit nervous. This is a time where I'm going to be talking about some very difficult things. And so I've never done anything like this before. There is no rule book that I can find anyway. And so, humanizing yourself and reminding them that this is a new experience for you. Even on the days that my judge ruled against me, I always remained courteous. I said, "Thank you for your time, Your Honor," even if I did not agree with the decision that was made. And this, in comparison to my ex-husband, who would throw up his hands in frustration, and he would sit there noticeably seething. There was one occasion that he escalated to the point that the bailiff threatened to remove him from the courtroom. So, over time, when the judge is painting a picture of who you are, who the other party is, and the overall picture in general, it all goes towards painting that picture. And, and I have shared this before also, even the people you bring into the courtroom as your support network. I watch judges scan the audience. They know most of the time who you walked in with. And if your support person is sitting there rolling their eyes, throwing their hands up, noticeably angry, I want to tap people on the shoulder in court and be like, stop, you're hurting her testimony, or you're hurting, the case by your actions. And I know my judge, I was told, was an expert in reading body language. He had actually been through training for it, and that many judges receive some type of training in reading body language. So those are things that most people don't pay attention to, but they really can make a difference, good or bad. So in reflecting back, there are so many things I would have done differently given what I know now about the system. I know that I annoyed my judge because I was not choosing my battles wisely, and I was submitting so much paperwork because everything felt important to me, and it was. But the reality is, if I submit a 50-page declaration, I can almost guarantee the judge is just going to skim it, and there's no telling what parts he's going to focus on versus tightening things up, being more concise, choosing my battles wisely, and narrowing it down to 10 pages versus 50. Because then, even if he does skim it, there's a better chance he's going to focus in on the points that are really valid, relevant, and will stand out to him. I remember, in the beginning of my battle back in 2009, naively believing that judges read everything that you submitted. And there were times I would walk into the courtroom and the judge would say, I haven't had time to read anything, give me a few minutes. And then we would sit there while he would just skim, through the paperwork and flip pages quick. And it was mind-boggling to me, but now I know that's just another day in family court. And it's incredibly painful because that court declaration that he was skimming contained my children's ongoing trauma and abuse. So, really getting to know the court system, viewing other cases, learning what's important to the judge, learning what pisses the judge off or piques the judge's interest. People do not give this enough weight. And especially in the beginning, when we go in assuming that all judges do the right thing, they all act in the best interest of children, it's simply not true. And here's the thing, it shouldn't be this way, but that's another area where radical acceptance had to become my religion in court. It doesn't mean that I agree with what is transpiring or the way it is, but it does mean that I don't have the energy to fight and go up against the entire system and protect my kids. So I radically accept that it's broken, and I try to navigate things with that understanding, putting my energy where I do have some control, of my actions, of my presentation, all with the focus of protecting my kids. And I wish there was oversight in the court. I wish there were regulations, checks and balances, consistency, lack of bias, but unfortunately, that's not reality. The exact same case in front of 5 different judges, you're going to have 5 different outcomes. I can almost guarantee it. So learning your local system, but specifically your local judge, is critical to the outcome of your case. One of the things that I often talk about is in almost any courtroom across the country, how I would present my case in courtroom A would be completely different from how I would present my case in courtroom B. Judges are human, and as much as they are supposed to remain unbiased, they aren't. And these things do carry over into the courtroom. I could shadow an attorney, and if I watched them in action in courtroom A and then followed them over to courtroom B, I may not even recognize them in the second courtroom because their presentation will be so different depending on who they are in front of. They play this game day in and day out. A good way to learn about the local judges in your system: consult with as many attorneys as your pocketbook will allow. Some areas you can still find free attorney consultations. Utilize that time to learn everything you can about your system. When you're meeting with attorneys, ask their opinion on your judge. Ask if the judge likes them. Do they typically have positive outcomes in front of that judge? These are things we never think to ask the attorneys, but they're important. Ask them, are there things my judge cares about, things that I should know about, things they don't care about? How knowledgeable are they on domestic violence, post-separation abuse? And you can let them know that the judge doesn't seem to like you, or that's your impression. And do they have any input or suggestions on how you can shift things? Start profiling the judge. We talk a lot about profiling the narcissist or the person we're up against. Start profiling the judge that you're in front of. What information could be helpful to your case? Examine your own presentation. Are there areas for improvement? Are you keeping your side of the street sparkling clean, taking the high road, even though it can be really lonely? And if a neutral third party were to read your communication, do you present in a positive light? Yellow Rock communication is so important. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to the One Mom's Battle website. You'll see a pop-up, and if you put your information in, it's going to automatically generate our guide to Yellow Rock communication. It's free. If you have pop-up blockers on your computer, then just scroll down to the bottom of our website and you can enter your name there and it'll generate that guide. Even if you have hit a rough patch with your judge, as long as you are not dealing with someone who falls into the pool of collusion, corruption, I do believe you can turn things around. And it can take a lot of effort, a lot of energy, but look for areas where you can make shifts or do things differently. And then this is the juncture where I pull comments from our social media channels. I call this advice from the battlefield. So these are comments that other people have made on this topic. The first one is recuse the judge. You need a valid reason to ask the judge to recuse themselves. And while it's not easy to do, it's worth looking into to see if it's applicable to your case. And she shared a website from Cornell Law. And so if you type in Cornell Law and recuse, like judge recuse, see what comes up. See if there's any angles there that you can utilize. Stand in your truth, show who you are authentically. That piggybacks on some of the things that we've talked about today. Someone else said, bring in expert witnesses or credible character witnesses. So, on that, are there people in your community who are very respected or respectable, and they can attest to who you are as a person, as a parent? Start wherever you can weave things like that in. I do believe it can be helpful. Someone else said, follow the court order exactly as it's written, accommodating the other party as much as possible. So I do want to pause on that because, a lot of people who struggle with boundaries, survivors, when they get that court order, they see it as a huge boundary, and it should be. But the family court system is one of the only branches of law where a court order is typically viewed as a default. If the two of you cannot get along, then, they want to see everybody co-parenting, kumbaya together, Sundays, all of that. If you can't figure things out, then you default to the court order. So some people adhere so strictly to the order. And if you have a restraining order in order to protect those things, then yes, that it's a different category. But for general court orders where the court has not recognized that the other person is a problem, I've been admonished for, holding to the court order exactly as the judge wrote it because I was seen as too strict, too rigid. And so, that is an area where I do see a lot of people trip up. And then the comment goes on to say, ask the judge on record in court how they are applying the law. Get a transcript of all hearings, set yourself up for an appeal. Ability to appeal is limited, so educate yourself on that and start building your case for appeal on the record in all of your hearings while keeping your side squeaky clean. And, appeals can be handled on your own. They are typically expensive. They aren't always successful, but it is something to look into. And then finally, the last comment that I pulled says, so the word feels is important. Feelings aren't always fact. Can she seek a second opinion? Does her attorney say from a legal standpoint that, yes, the judge doesn't like you? A judge is meant to review information, not necessarily feelings. Keep emotion out as hard as it is. Show proof, document everything. Be willing to do a search in your heart of what you think is right versus what the law declares to be right. Some of the traditions we grew up thinking were correct aren't necessarily what the law declares to be just. As much as we want to protect our kids from anything, use it as an opportunity to teach them how to speak up against abusive adults, how to set boundaries of what or who they will or will not allow in their lives. And on that last part, I just have to piggyback onto that. I don't believe we should ever put kids in a place to have expectations on them that they should use their voice and stand up to an unsafe person or adult. I see a lot of people want to go that route. And I always say, but as a 34-year-old woman, many years ago, I didn't feel safe standing up to my abuser. And so how we would expect a child to do that, that is one thing I cannot get on board with. So I do believe in teaching our children many of those same lessons in general terms, but just never with the expectation that it's going to be used against the abuser, because I don't think it's safe, for one. So I hope some of this has been helpful. Please make sure you are subscribed. Please share if you find that this could be helpful for someone who is divorcing or going through a child custody battle with a toxic, unhealthy person. Take care, everyone. See you next week.